All right, everyone. Hello. This is day 19 of 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tomlins Nyback. Thanks for joining me in this small community once again. 19 days in a row, going strong. 28 days, we'll have a habit. So let's keep pressing forward and make it happen. As usual, our housekeeping items. I am inspired and informed by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. And you can find plenty of YouTubes of him and the three specific works of his that I'm coming out of. The Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black Labor and White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice here in America, which is very dire and it is truly the kernel of the conversation. We talk about rights and morality, and a lot of things are spoken of, but it boils down to money. Follow the money, and you'll come up with a whole lot of answers and reasons for white power, black vulnerability, things like that. And finally, his book, Powernomics. I'm almost done with this book, A National Plan for Empowering Black America. Great ideas and plans he has. I'm not necessarily a recipient in that community. It seems like there are some small black collections of people moving forward with that. The ideas there. My particular circle, which at this moment happens to be mostly white, which is perfectly fine, is not obviously moving in that direction to empower Black America. But, we're going to do things over time. We don't have to rush anymore. I'll get into a little story about that. Also, we're going to have some story time. And while the conversation can be serious, a lot of the times we will get into some fictional ideas. But note that Uncle Tom's Cabin has shaped the minds in America, literature, media, television, radio, any media. Very powerful and helps to shape and inform what we do, how we act, what we are in present day. We're going to talk, actually today is going to be Uncle Tom's Cabin segment. And if you have the book, we're into chapter 2. And behind me, if you look, is our hashtag #US2 that'll connect you with the movement. Other parts of the movement, there's many. I should do a section on that. I know of 2 specific groups. This is just one of them, hashtag #US2, to get in further on the conversation. I'm sure there's plenty on Facebook and other websites and communities that abound. So with that, we are going to, my name is Tomlins Nyback, if I have not said that already. And we're going to get right in to this segment, chapter 2, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I love this book. I'm still moving through this book as well. And literature is important. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about the importance of literature and the importance of Harriet Beecher Stowe's work, Uncle Tom's Cabin. In the year, this was originally 40 or so articles in a abolitionist publication over time in the mid-1800s, called the New Era or something, or the National Era or something like that. You can Google all this information. I don't have it fixed in my head. So this book, although when it came out, it was the #2 bestseller behind the Bible. The Bible's been #1. I don't know if it's still #1 with what's going on today. I don't follow along those things specifically, but in that year, in the mid-1800s, Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was #2. There's also a subtitle of this book, says, Or Life Among the Lonely, or something like that. Anyway, this book is important because from here you get a lot of the developments of stereotypes of black people in America. You've heard, I'm sure you've heard Uncle Tom. Someone referred to as Uncle Tom or Uncle Tom behavior. We want to find out that we need to massage that term and use it properly as we get further along. It comes from this book. As we get further along in Miss Stowe's work, we'll find stereotypes of the black family. We're going to see how black family didn't carry weight or purpose as white families do. So much of our black existence, dysfunction is so expected, but some of its roots and sources can be found easily in slavery America. Oh, what else? Just the buying and selling of humans as property, things like that. Please note, American slavery was probably the most vicious, unethical slavery in the world, and in my opinion, I've not done any serious research, but just scratching the surface of this issue, I personally believe and say that slavery in America still exists today. We blacks have we have freedoms and we can come and go, but we're not part of the franchise, so to speak, as a people. We still jump through hoops. Other groups that compete with us still get more benefits, recognition, access to wealth and resources. Today, the DACA issue, the DREAM Act subject is coming back to the fore. Blacks never got, serious money or reparations, even though it was said at various points in history that blacks would get, something for their labor. Until this day, no reparations, no type of payment. We got a lot of symbols and all that, but we don't have power as a group. That's why we have a white marble statue of Dr. Martin Luther King on the Washington Mall that was carved by an Asian. That's just the beginning. But I think over time we will get it together and have, if we do things methodically over decades, well, I think we can see some turnaround and see some positive steps to be taken seriously if, now watch, because, white power kind of sees us coming, so to speak, sees us improving. I wouldn't be surprised if white power made adjustments to the game. And that's something that we need to look out for, something I want to think about, maybe talk about, because I muse on that. If blacks suddenly stop being incarcerated, would there be some reapplication of the Jim Crow laws, semi-slavery, to put us, make us vulnerable again? I mean, could you think if blacks stopped selling crack and kept families together, stopped indulging in so much gross dysfunction, what would that do to a system whose elements of support include mass black incarceration and homelessness and things like that? You're going to see some massive rush to restructuring, which I would like to see in my lifetime. The system held me hostage and kept me distracted for many decades. But before I close my eyes and go on to my little by and by, sweet by and by, I plan on seeing something to make me smile about the future of Black America. All right, for our last few minutes, let's talk about Chapter 2. It's titled The Mother. And real quick, just to recap, the story starts out, slave master Mr. Shelby is talking to a slave handler, a trader, about selling a slave named Tom. And he doesn't really, he's still not focused yet, not even in this chapter. So we got 2 chapters. The book's called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Uncle Tom just gets a little first mention in the first chapter. Now here here we got the slave trader handler talking to Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby has, like, I guess it's common with a lot of slave owners. You know, these slaves are property. They represent some monetary value. So Mr. Shelby has gotten into some financial issues, and now he needs to sell a slave. He's selling one of his best slaves. That slave is named Tom. In the midst of this conversation, a little boy named Harry comes in. He is the son of a slave woman named Eliza. Now, Eliza is very fond of her little boy. We're going to talk more about the seriousness of the connection. It's more than just matriarchal love. There's some other issues that go into this. Harry comes in, kind of performs, and this slave trader is just enamored with little Harry and wants to buy him and take himself. And he's anticipating a big return on investment if he can get a hold of Harry. So after much conversation, Mr. Shelby agrees to sell Harry as well. He's part of the deal along with Tom. This should clear up Mr. Shelby's financial issues quite concisely. In the midst of the conversation, Eliza, she hears bits and pieces of it. She's not sure, but that motherly gut instinct has her gone. She asks her mistress if this is so. Her mistress, who the white woman has no power in the white man's home, especially in these days. But she brushes it off. She's leaving the plantation to go off and spend money and live luxuriously, you know, on her little vacation or something. Anyway, but Eliza is still worried. Now, so we pick up here on Eliza. Scene opens with Eliza. And Eliza, she's a young girl. She was apparently bought, so she knows about being separated from her family. You know, the slaves are moved around and sold and everything. They're pawns in this financial economic game of chess in the slave world. So she knows that. So her gut is still turning about the possibility of Harry being sold, although it's a done deal for the slave handler and Mr. Shelby. She's noted as a very beautiful woman. She's a product of a slave master sleeping with a slave woman. And this whole beautiful race, or beautiful collection of people with a lighter skin, much lighter than mine. You find many of them. You find many of them around, but especially down New Orleans, there's just communities of I've always said light-skinned people, but they're mulatto, quadroon, and there's plenty of terms. Red bone is what I've heard, and I've used a couple times. But very attractive people, the men and women. So this chapter opens that talks about her beauty and things like that, and it introduces another character. Eliza's husband, named George Harris, and George is the same complexion, the same kind of person. You know, it's sad. You know, these slaves. You know, it's so hypocritical. Like the slave masters. What? How can I start? Okay, the slave master, white slave master, goes into the black slave woman, but the product is not half and half. The product is a lot of white, but enough black to make that person a slave, that's very sad. Remember Roots, um, Chuck Connor's character rapes Kizzy. You know, the outcome is Chicken George. You know, but it's not the father's blood that validates the slave or the person that's comes from that union. Yeah, that's slave because that person's coming from a black womb is a slave. So, you know, you had a lot of children of these masters still at slave status, still sold, still thought of as property. At that, oh boy, I could probably go on and on about that, but I mean, think about that. The children of these unions are slaves and not, at least masters are in control of their fate. Think about that. So George and Eliza are these same type of people, and this is happening in Kentucky, you know, more north of some of the hardcore slavery that's happening in the Deep South. And they have a wedding, and their wedding is, you know, very respectable. They're clean, or they don't jump the broom, I want to say. Let me just make that conversation short. There's wine and cheese, and the wedding is more white than two slaves that are, you know, come out of their shack and decide to get together and jump the broom like in Roots. Right? Now George is very smart. He's very adroit with his mind, and think about all of the wasted mental talent that was just wasted out there in the fields and worked to death and everything. So, and George, he works for some kind of manufacturing, you know, some type of industrial setting, and he invents something that improves productivity and brings profits to this place. Now, since George is a slave, his slave master gets the proceeds from his efforts. This could be the beginning or the a reinforcement of intellectual property going on. You know, George, you know, he sees something, he abstracts it and makes little suggestions and improvements, and the employer loves it because he's increasing productivity. Well, George's master does not like that. George's master, remember, sorry, these slave masters weren't smarter necessarily than the slaves. You know, most of them, from what I've read out of Dr. Anderson's works, had third grade education or less. Yet the slave uneducated could abstract, like an engineer and think of better processes, which is natural for a slave to think of a better, easier way to do the hard work. Um, so the slave master sees this, and he visits occasionally, he probably comes occasionally, periodically, to receive some proceeds from George's work. Now, George, he's very proud, and the company owners talk George up, and they're very proud of George's work and all that. And George's head is kind of held high. He's feeling some pride in his work. The master does not like that. That is this elevation of the slave, and this is something that comes clearly out in a lot of the situations in the South where, well, not just South, but just anywhere where the hatred of blackness is such that Some whites don't like it when blacks appear better. That's still today. We still see it today. Sports, business things. We'll go. We've already talked about some of the um, demonstrations of that. But George's master is very upset that his slave is thought of as better than him. He feels it's small and inferior in himself. Therefore, his slaves, his property, can dare not even have that image in their mind of being better. So on that very day of all these accolades, adorations, and such, the slave master takes George back home, puts him to the hardest labor work, dogs him and demeans him at every point, and it's very critical and uses every opportunity to um, demean this man. This man's got the mind of an engineer. He can abstract. He probably do trigonometry, calculus, and in his mind, one of those minds. It's not just white folks that can do that. This guy could see probably the machinery parts or whatever gears, the necessary equipment, belts, and things. And I can kind of talk on that because of my blue collar experience and my uh, involvement in machine shops and around machines and things like that. So I understand George's gift, so to speak. He takes them back, and the manufacturer, the industrialist, says he's going to try to do his best to get George back, but that's kind of futile. Then chapter 2, it talks about George's marriage. I already talked about that a little bit. Eliza, getting back to Eliza, this is important for some groundwork in some later chapters. Eliza and George, through their union, have had 2 children prior to Harry, but Eliza lost those 2 children, and so as a mother, she's very distraught over this. She doesn't, I don't understand maternal instincts, but it's understandable that she's very distraught. So when Harry comes along and lives, sticks around, and he's starting to grow up, she grows fonder and closer to him every day. So even the hint, the possibility of being separated from this beautiful young boy is intolerable. In her mind, he's described as being very attractive. He has probably long white, long hair, but it's white, so it's thin, and it probably curls down at the bottom and things like that. Attractive young little boy there. So she's very close, and she's going to be very protective of Harry. Sorry. So George's life in the second chapter is he's at the hands of a merciless, ignorant white slave owner. Makes choices and probably decisions that don't make sense, that probably interrupt production, makes life more difficult, have process. I've seen that in my life. I've made suggestions, mentioned issues and problems to employers, landowners, people in control of my housing, and they go ahead and make some dumbass decision that really screws up things. That's happened a lot. Now, I'm on guard now. Oh boy, I'd be shaking my head. This is obviously the right thing. Sometimes I'd see my ideas employed later, and that has actually happened. Now that I think about it, where I've mentioned some ideas. I know I worked at a facility. This was the facility that addressed interpersonal violence, mainly women's abuse issues. And I made a mention, we should be able to access the um, the server remotely. That would make things so much easier. And because I lived a distance from the place that this place. Oh, I'm glad I can laugh about now. It hurts some of the things that went on there, but the white woman shot me down. Very very concisely. She castrated me, so to speak. We're going to talk about black male castration as it relates to slavery and things like that. Um, so that resistance that I didn't recognize as racism at the time, she did that. Oh, but lo and behold, a few years later, another little white girl with great intentions. And in her defense, she had no idea that I had made some of the suggestions like this. She makes this suggestion to my white female boss at the time, and it's received with so much adoration and energy. And this is a good thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm the type of person when that kind of thing goes on, I'm going to tell you about yourself. Just me one on one. I don't need groups, marches, or anything. I'm going to go straight into the hornet's nest and say, hey, I made that suggestion and you shot me down. What's going on with you? All right, so that'll be another story. But let's get back to Uncle Tom's Cabin, because you can tell I got still working on some issues with that. Still processing, always processing. At least I'm not stuck. Okay, here we go. Okay, so Harry's born and all of this stuff. And the end of chapter 2 finishes up with the manufacturer. He promised George that he would come and try to retrieve him and bring him back to the business to be productive and all that. But the white slave master, white power, white ignorance is still determined to be evil. That's all the simple way to put it. And part of the conversation, chapter 2 ends with the slave master, in rebuttal. He says, look, it's a free country, sir. The man is mine. What a contradiction in terms, right? In that one sentence. I think Harriet did that intentionally, too. I don't know her mind, but it's very intentional, free country, but the man is mine. These two, the size, like the two sides of the same coin coexisting, which logically that doesn't fit. If this is a free country and men are free, then this man is free, right? If uh, if it's not a free country and there's the possession, the ownership, then the man is property and can be mine. It can't be both. So this contradiction is revealed. Also, this particular text is annotated, and I finally found something I got to tease out with you all in the future, and it is that the Constitution stated that the blacks were 3/5 of a human being. Now, what that means is that I can't go into it now because we're at the end of the segment. But what it means, the reason for the Civil War was not slavery. It was economics and politics. And I say that because, and I try to think of this one person being 3/5 of a human being. which means if you do the math, every 5 slaves represents 3 human beings. We'll get into the math a little later, how that works out. So if you think, one slave master having 500 slaves is his, in a census, that master is counted as being 301 persons. Now, if you think about that as far as representation in Congress, then you got some issues with voting and policy making in the United States. That's where some of the foundations of the Civil War come about. Not just to overdo slavery to free the slaves and help black people. It was voting blocks of the South. One man commanding hundreds of votes. According to the Constitution, that 3/5 of a person didn't have a vote, but under the authority of a slave master, every 5 people made 3 votes. And the slaves did not know this or exercise this or press for this. We'll get into that. But keep that in mind. We'll talk about the specifics and the importance of 3/5 of a human being. That, to my knowledge, has never been overturned. We place policies and stacked policies on top of issues, but we never. Where's the repeal of these sayings and such? So that's chapter 2 of Uncle Tom's Cabin. I hope you could follow along with my rattling and side chains and whatnot. Please get the book yourself. Also, all the books that I reference. YouTube, Dr. Claude Anderson, and be informed. And if we can't, maybe we can't make great strides right now, but be sensitive. That would be my greatest hope in your relationship, whatever you're black, white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever your identification is in America, be truthful about your stance. I'm black, so I'm being honest and voicing my opinions as I agree with Dr. Anderson. Thanks for sticking around. My name's Tomlin's Nyback. This is 365 Days Towards Racial Change, Day 19. Be well.